Meanwhile, the landscape of U.S.-Africa relations has also shifted dramatically between 2024 and early 2026. What was once a relationship defined by long-standing trade agreement and military cooperation has been seen a strategic pivot away from Washington. Let's unpack this further. I'm joined now by Africa analyst advocate Sipho Mantula. Advocate, good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on this afternoon. First and foremost, what does this moment spell for South Africa in particular, who is seen by the United States as having somewhat of a cozy relationship with Iran, even though not overtly so?
Afternoon, Thabo, even to your viewers. Thabo, very interesting geopolitics that we are seeing developing. And as you are talking about Africa's relation as well as South Africa's relation with Iran for many years, Thabo, and the impact of the US and Israel undermining international law, you'll understand that South Africa has got many bilateral agreements with the Global South, many agreements with countries that were seen to be the enemies of the US and Israel for many years. Another important aspect is that even if you have this war going on, Africa, it is affected, Thabo, not only in the Southern Hemisphere, but you find that in the Horn of Africa, where you have Djibouti, Somalia, you have Ethiopia and Eritrea. But the role of South Africa now, Thabo, is that as we have been given the task early this month by the AU to be in the Peace and Security Council, how do we address this question of nuclear weapons, because this is an important aspect that South Africa in itself, you'll recall what we call the Pelindaba agreement about South Africa dealing with its nuclear facility, and the same what America is getting into, Thabo, to undermine the international law in terms of waging conflicts and operations and threatening the human lives in Tehran, because these attacks are the similar attacks that we saw in 2025. And I think South Africa came very clear in terms of why are we not addressing the international conflicts through the international forum, which is the UN Security Council.
Now, let's talk about this phenomenon. Can more and more African countries afford to divorce themselves, for lack of a better word, from cooperation with the United States?
Not at all, Thabo. Remember the summits that have been happening, what I call the ritual summits of Africa, US, Africa, France summit, Africa, Russia summit. But when you look at the US, again, is this issue of moving away from aid and using this concept of investment and economic growth, using their defense strategy. And they are using the word critical minerals. In Africa, we use natural resources that have to benefit its own citizens. But as we said, the packages that we've been seeing from Southern Africa to East Africa, denouncing an American economic relations that is based on what we might call a unipolar state, Thabo, not a multipolar state, because in a multipolarity, people have to be equal, and beneficiation must benefit the interest of member states. Now, Africa, the only problem I've been struggling with, Thabo, for many years is how to redefine its interest, its regional interest, its continental interest, in line with its national interest of its member states and its citizens. And that's where we find the US dominating most of the African countries and trying to override even the World Health Organization. Because remember, in Zambia, they've been trying to use the health package. We saw in the DRC, they tried to mediate what we called transactional piecemeal agreement. I don't call it a peace deal, I call it a piecemeal, not only for a lack of better weight, but for a better weight of being offensive in terms of defining the transactional peace deals that America has been signing with many African countries. And you saw from the Trump State of the Union claiming that he has resolved 8 conflicts in the continent. And I don't think it is truth. Even if you do fact-checking, are those conflicts, are guns being silenced in the DRC? No. Are the guidelines silenced in the Horn of Africa? No. And that's where I said America is using its superpower tendency to undermine international law and also undermine the African sovereignties.
But what you are seeing, though, Advocate, increasingly so, especially in 2026, African countries at least trying to assert their agency in relations with the United States. For example, by South Africa, by demanding mutual respect or maybe mutual beneficial partnerships and this reduced reliance on the United States aid. Is that message that the African countries are pursuing, asserting Africa on a global stage?
Absolutely, Thabo. Remember, we just came out from the Davos summit. Ghana was coming very clear. South Africa came very clear, and hence you saw South Africa was given opportunity to host the World Economic Forum. I think Ghana has been very clear, Thabo, in terms of Africa's position. And you remember in Davos, the issue of the Canadian Prime Minister, where it was said, are we in the dining table? Are we part of the menu, or are we going to be sacrificed once more, Thabo? And I think Africa, in this instance, cannot be part of the menu. It has to be part of creating the ingredients of the menu, not to be part of the menu where they have been sacrificed. And I think South Africa's role has been very clear, Thabo, in terms of the international game that has been played out there in terms of the UN reform. South Africa has been very vocal, Thabo, on the question of how we look at the geopolitical trade relations, this global traffic of tariffs that also affected Africa, Thabo, last year. South Africa and the AU had to have a wake-up call. Why are we not trading amongst ourselves? And if you look at the Sahel template, we see in the Sahel, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, Thabo, they are working on the Sahelian state regional cooperation of economy. We just saw this week also Botswana and Zambia, Kazangula Border Authority, now infrastructure and trade. Now, this issue that you raised of the free trade in Africa, regional bodies, Thabo, what then is the role of the regional bodies in terms of trade? And you find that the trade does not, benefit our people. In fact, we become a dumping zone of where the raw materials have been still taken from Africa. And I think this has been a long script that many African philosophers, leaders, academics, economists, there's been lamenting, Thabo, about the bullying tactic of European powers, of American supremacy that is undermining the international laws of trade, and the same using military power. Look at the military industrial complex that we are in, Thabo. All natural resources that have been tapped in Africa, they're also part of the plot of their, what they call military technology. And it is high time that Africa must wake up from its sleep and start to be united, Thabo, and we avoid these summits that end up becoming tourist summits. They don't result, they don't build the Africa we want of Agenda 2063.
Appreciate your time. That's Advocate Sipho Mantula there unpacking for us, of course, Africa-US relations.